Hello there, everyone. Let's create a program called crayons.py. In this program, I want to simulate a box with some crayons. And furthermore, I want to model it using OOP, in other words, object-oriented programming. So before I even start writing the real code here, I need to figure out what is going to be going on. So the way I want it to work is that global, which is anything that's not in a class or not in a function, global interacts with the box object, and then the box object acts as an administrator to the crayon objects, we'll just say crayon objects. So what that means is that global does not interact with the crayons. Global interacts with the crayons only through the box object. So this is how I'm going to design my program. In this way, I achieve good object-oriented programming because I have everything compartmentalized. Things only interact in the way that would kind of logically make sense, right? Because let's say this is my box. Here I'll kind of draw it out using ASCII art. Now, if I am a person outside of this box and I want to take some crayons, I have to go through the box. So let's say there's some crayons in here. Say these percent signs are crayons. Right? So if I have, let's say, 3 crayons in this one box, and I'm a person, I have to interact with the box first in order to then interact with the crayons. Okay, so now that we've just talked about how we're going to model this program, let's actually start writing it. And then I think it'll make the absolute most sense. I'm going to comment all this out. Then below here, I'm going to import random, just in case. And I'll begin by defining my box because I'm going to have global interact with the box. So it's more important that I complete the box class first. So of course, what do we always do? We create an init function. This is the function that's always going to be called once I create a box object. In other words, an instance of the box class. In here, well, we know that the box is going to have really one thing in it that we want, and that is crayons. So we want these crayons to be in the box. So upon initialization of the box, also initialize a list of a blank list for now. Soon enough, we're going to be appending crayon objects to this list. So then, well, what we want is number to represent the number of crayons. So the user can define how many crayons they want. To do that, let's put a loop in there. Let's range from 0 to number. And in here, let's append the following. Well, actually, let's do the following. Let's have x be a crayon. I haven't actually created the crayon class yet, but for now, we'll just keep it like that. We're going to want the following. We want it to take a color. And just keep it a color for now. Then we're going to append the crayon to our crayon objects list. So That's how we do that. We can't actually run this yet because here on line 25, we create a crayon object within the box class, but crayon is not yet its own class. So somewhere above here, let's define crayon. This will be even simpler than the box. It'll just have its own init. It'll have self. It'll have a color, right? Because every time we create a crayon, we give it a color, like we did on line 28. Here we gave it red. It'll be a string. In it, we'll give crayon its own color variable, self.color. It'll just be equal to whatever color is sent to it. And then you know what? Let's also make another variable where we define if that crayon has been used yet. Let's call it used. Here we'll do self.used equals used. And every time we make a crayon, let's say it has not been used. So used is false to begin with. Now, if we run this, nothing's going to happen because we have not actually created any objects yet. We've only made the respective classes. So let's actually make a box object and give it, of course, equal to box. Then, because box's init function takes a single argument, that's number, we're going to have the number begin as 5. So what this is going to do is it's going to loop through 5 times, create 5 crayon objects, and give those crayon objects to the list contained in the box object. So those crayon objects are going to be stored in the box object. If we run this program, still nothing happens. That's because we're not really doing anything once we've created those crayons in that box. So let's call mybox.getInfo. And we'll make a getInfo function within the box class. And what this getInfo function is going to do is we want it to loop through all the crayons and print their current attributes. So what color they are, whether they've been used, etc. First, let's print a little line here so it kind of separates the print statements. Now, we want to loop through all of the crayon objects. So we need to loop through the length of the crayon object list. So we just take the length of it, loop through it. Then within that, let's just begin by printing the respective variables to begin with. So self.crayon object. We're looking through using the ith variable. So we put in square brackets I, then we'll put a dot. And then what variable do we want? Well, let's take color for now. If this is correct, it should print the color red 5 times. Looks like I missed an S over here. And objects. Another S on line 37. Okay, so we see a box is created, 5 crayons are created, then we're calling the getInfo function from global on the box object, and it's telling us the attributes of all of its crayons. So every crayon is red, so of course it just prints red. Let's change that and make it a little more interesting before we go any further. Let's assume the color is red to begin with. We're creating the crayons. Then we'll make a random variable. if that variable is 1, then let's change the color to blue. If that variable is 2, well, let's change that color to green. If that color is 3, well, let's have that color be violet. So now instead of defining every crayon with the same initialization of red, let's have it be color. So if C, which is from 0 to 3, is 0, it's red. If it's 1, it's blue, 2, green, 3, violet. And this is random, so every time it runs, we see that we have 5 different colored crayons in our box. Okay, so we're getting somewhere in our program here. What else can we do? Well, let's go back to our getInfo function here, and let's change it a little bit. Instead of just printing the variable like we do on line 43, I'm going to get rid of that line. Do the following. I'm going to get 2 variables from the crayons using a function. So of course I put self, crayon objects, the ith one, and then here I have a function called crayon info. So instead of dot color, I'm putting dot crayon info, which is a function, but that function isn't built yet. So let's go back to our crayon function, create a crayon info, our crayon class, and create a crayon info function. What this will do is it'll return both the color and whether it's been used or not at the same time. And then let's make another function here called use. If we ever decide to use a single crayon object, the used variable will be set to true instead of false, like it currently always is by default. Okay, so we finished our crayon class. Now here, we're returning color and used from a single crayon object by calling that crayon object's crayon info function. Next, let's actually use those variables. So if used is false, make a temporary variable and say that it has not been. So later on, we're going to concatenate this with a larger string. If the crayon is used, it'll say it's not, or it's been used. Otherwise, it'll say it's not been used. So if it's used as false, that crayon has not been used. Otherwise, I'm going to say that crayon has been used. Then let's make a print statement where we tell the user all the attributes of that particular crayon object. So crayon number I is looping through 0 through 5. So in the first iteration, it'll be crayon 0, second iteration crayon 1, and so on. Crayon I is this color. And has, comma, and will be the variable, has been or has not been used, period. Awesome. So what if we run this now? Well, we didn't close it with a parenthesis. Okay, so we create a box, then it loops through and tells us the attributes of all 5 of its crayons. Crayon 0 is violet and has not been used. Crayon 1 is green and has not been used. Okay, so remember, earlier we made a use function for our crayon. So how do we use a crayon from global scope? Well, the way we designed it is that we can't, right? So the crayons are contained within the my box. So in my box, let's call a function that we're going to create called use crayon. It takes one argument. Let's have the argument be 1. So if we want to use crayon 1, we call the use crayon function with 1 as input. Then after using it, let's get info again. So use crayon is not built. It should be built into the box class. So let's make a new function here. Let's call it use crayon, of course. Health. And then we give it a number. We gave it 1 this time, but it could be any number. Let's say that, which crayon is currently being used. So we'll create a which variable. Then we go to the which object in the crayon objects list. So which is basically the index. And we call the use function, which we built earlier. Use is just going to set the self.used variable for that particular crayon to true. Okay, so now if we run it, when we first call getInfo, none of the crayons have been used. But the second time we call getInfo, crayon 1 has been used. So now everything is pretty much built. We can interact with our classes, our crayon objects, just by creating a box and then calling functions upon that box.